Well, how is it possible that the other side has not won this great battle that destroys all souls? That you and I and millions of others Americans are proof positive that they have not succeeded. I mean, what went wrong? Was it lack of money? No, they have trillions of dollars at their disposal. George Soros has plenty of money to go around, and he uses it. And we don't have nearly as much at our disposal. Was it a lack of people? No, there are millions of radical revolutionaries out there ready to promote this revolution. And many of them are even extremely intelligent and capable people. And we have the bare minimum. They have all the elements for victory, and yet they have failed. We have all the conditions that would guarantee defeat, and yet we're still standing in the fight. They haven't won yet. And all this leads to the conclusion that there must be a weak spot in this revolution that makes resistance feasible. This same weak spot makes our return to order and to God possible. And this factor makes the battle fair. And so this is my first point. We have at our disposal an all-powerful weapon that, in face of an overwhelming power of the devil and his conspirators, it's a weapon that everyone here in this room has wielded. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And that powerful weapon is our ability to say no. This revolution must confront our free will. As much as the other side would like to turn us into machines that automatically say yes, we can't be programmed. Our human nature is such that it cannot be determined, forced, or programmed against our free will. Our sacred tradition teaches this basic truth, that each human being has free will and determines his final destiny, whether it be heaven or hell. What makes Catholics different is from others is the other side tries to deny free will and says that everything's determined by structures and society and any other way, but not your own responsibility. But the church says no, that our free will can be influenced, but cannot be determined. It can be pressure to conform. People might even use force to try to make us say yes. But in the final analysis, we must consent. We hold this powerful ability that renders this revolution weak. That is what many of us did to overcome our secular society and proclaim our faith. At some part in our lives, many of us just said, no, I'm not going to do it. Some said no people said no for many reasons. Some did it out of inertia or laziness because their habits are such that it's a lot of trouble to say yes. For others, it was a temperamental decision. I just don't like this kind of thing. Others were more logical and gave, several reasons, doctrinal reasons. Others were inspired and strengthened by God's grace to resist. But in the end, we all said no. And the other side could do nothing to stop us. Now, I'm sure you and your personal lives have experienced the power of this no. Sometimes the will of a small child can be so strong as to render an adult powerless. Sometimes a person closer to you decides to do something and you sense it's useless to try to persuade to the contrary. Because you know it is an immense power, this ability to say no. I recently received a message from a man who read a Return to Order article about why people delete their Facebook pages. And the man said, I'll tell you why I deleted my Facebook account. There's so much filth on Facebook that I couldn't take it. I got off. He simply said no, and there's nothing billionaire Mark Zuckerberg can do to get him back on. Even the most totalitarian regimes have to deal with this no, and oftentimes they are defeated. I remember reading the book Against All Hope by the autobiography of the Cuban prisoner Armando Valladares. And in this book, he told of being imprisoned, beaten, starved, tortured, deprived of sleep, to force him to give up his opposition to communism in Cuba. But he and so many others who had nothing to fight with resisted that effort by the sheer force of their will. And the communists were eventually defeated by his no. International pressure was such that they freed him, and he now lives in Miami. Indeed, even God himself respects our free will. He does not force our free will. We make the decision to accept or reject him. The free will of man is a powerful weapon that God gave to each one of us that we might resist the devil and his conspirators. And that is why the devil and the other side has not won. It's also why we haven't won. Because the power to influence the free will of men works both ways. People can also say no to God and Our Lady. They can reject what is good for them in accordance with their human nature. And there is this constant fight between the two sides to influence the will of individuals. And there is this drama that will continue to the end of time. This back and forth movement over free will that makes up that fascinating narrative which we call history. In the final analysis, we all determine the course of history. And this fight is made even more dramatic when we consider that we are not alone in this struggle over the free will of men. Fully engaged in this fight, we have God and His grace constantly calling us to Him. We have the angels fighting for us. We have the saints interceding for us. On the other side, that's the devil and his minions who are always trying to pull us down to our perdition. Now, there are times in history when one side has the advantage over the other. And today we do suffer from a period where the devil is dominant. However, we should take comfort in the fact that our Fatima future foresees the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. We know she will win, and soon. The first thing we need to do is to continually say no. And so my first point is this. We can answer the attack on our culture because we have free will. We can always say no. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop us if we are so determined. It lies in our hands whether we will say no and convince others to say no. But simply saying no is not enough to get things done. It's a great start. You can stop many bad things, but it won't get you where you need to go. That brings me to my second point. The second point is we need to find the best way to say no. God not only gave us goodwill, or free will, but He also, that we might say no, but He also gave us intelligence and wisdom so that we might say no more effectively. And God gave us natural and organic means that, like free will, are available to everyone. He gave us faculties and criteria by which we inform our decisions. This can be done with the materials at hand. Artificial means and huge resources and money and people. Artificial means need huge resources, money, and people. Natural means don't necessarily need it. And again, we return to the point of fairness, because all our criteria are based on the modern idea of power and money. Power and money are helpful tools, but they are not the determining factor to success. But we feel it's unfair. We are conditioned to believe that only huge artificial solutions will work. To do something, you need billions of dollars and resources. And so, naturally, we get discouraged when we see the liberal establishment controls everything. Media, education, government, institutions. Again, George Soros is there with his billions of dollars at his disposal. And we don't have it. The other side has plenty of people to carry out the agenda, and we don't. And so some mistakenly think that the only way to stop and defeat this great enemy is to assemble an opposing and equal force to oppose this enemy. And that's not true. I mean, such a strategy is like someone wishing to stop a train by using another equal train traveling in the opposite direction on the same track. Of course, both trains will stop, but they'll also be destroyed. A much more efficient way to halt a train is to use a brake, a small, strategically placed device that allows a single person to stop the overwhelming forward motion of a long and heavy train. So our challenge is to find the brakes that will enable us to stop heading toward the abyss. And that brake is something I call organic and natural solutions, which is outlined in the book. God gives us these ways to win. And so this is my second point. Avoid the modern tendency to look for huge, instant, push-button, one-size-fits-all solutions. When you say no, don't use a giant freight train to stop another giant freight train. God gives us certain breaks where we confront the forces of evil. And they are found in our sacred tradition. God gives us the break of conscience and the ability to make people have problems of conscience, whereby we make a proper judgment of our no's. We have the ability to stand out and, by our example, force people to come to conclusions, about whether we're right or wrong. He gives us the break of natural law, which is written in the hearts of all men, whereby we know what is right and wrong and can act accordingly. We have the right to resist bad authority respectfully, yet firmly, because right is on our side. And these faculties and these breaks can be extremely powerful. For example, they can be extremely effective by protesting against the evils of the days. Protests work. People naturally fear for their reputation. They don't like people showing up at their front door. And if you find the right angle, the break, your protests and actions can be extremely effective. You can answer the attacks upon our culture and our faith. Don't believe those who say that by protesting you give the offending party free publicity. Business people hate free bad publicity. They'll do anything to avoid it. Ask the airlines if they like all the free publicity they receive from canceling thousands of flights. Ask Target if they like the free publicity around the transgender dressing rooms that cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. I remember we once did a protest to a museum that was displaying a blasphemous picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. We organized a large protest and 800 people showed up. And later, a public relations expert at a conference for museum curators analyzed our protest. And one of our people just happened to be there. And she said the television image of one grandmother filmed praying the Rosary in front of the museum destroyed the best press release you could possibly make. And she said, and I quote, she told the museum directors, if you find yourself in such a situation, hire the best crisis control public relations firm you can afford, because you're not going to win. You're just going to survive. Now, this protest cut the blasphemous show short. This successful protest was the tiny brake that allows us to stop the train. And that's the beautiful thing about these solutions. They respect the nature of men. They're within our reach. You don't need a lot of money. God puts at our disposal proportional and natural means that allows us to act against disproportional and artificial means. Good works with our nature. Evil works against it. So in times of crisis, these solutions unexpectedly open ways for not just for one answer, but for many answers to a problem. And these solutions do not require micromanagement or excessive control. They can take place pretty freely for people who are involved. What does it take to do these types of solutions? It involves having a guiding vision of what you want and a few fundamental principles, and then let people have their say in the way they do it. And the examples, I'll give several examples. The pro-life movement is a very good example. It allows people to take the principle of life and express themselves in 1,000 different ways. There's no one central pro-life organization. There is only one central pro-abortion organization. But rather, there are hundreds of different projects that work together that are so many and so varied that it's almost impossible to destroy. These people who are involved have passion, and it has results. It's not by chance that since 1991, 1,661 abortion clinics have closed, or that states have enacted hundreds of anti-abortion laws. Another example I will give, this is just simply from our own efforts, is that we have what we call a public square Rosary Rallies. For those of you unfamiliar with them, they are public witnesses to the faith where we ask people to go on a public square and to pray for our nation in this time of trial. We have a general vision of what we ask them to do. We have a guidebook and a way to how to go about it. And we give them a banner and instructions and say, you take it from there. We don't micromanage. We don't tell them how to do it. We just let them express themselves. And there are other ways in which Catholics have used to sidestep the establishment to say no effectively. I mean, what is homeschooling but an organic solution that takes on the education establishment? And as many of you who can testify, there is no one way to homeschool. You have a few basic principles and let people do it the way they want to do it. I would also point out the vibrant Catholic radio network. There are over 300 Catholic radio stations in the United States. And they're all pretty much nickel and dime operations. They start at least as nickel and dime operations. And they rely on a lot of volunteers. And they put together these efforts. And today they are a real power. The spread of traditional Mass is probably another example of organic solutions in action. And this is very much the way the Church always deals with souls, all of which are very different. Someone once asked St. Ignatius, he said, well, how do you become a saint? And he didn't come up with a series of formulas and penances and fastings and prayers. He just said, will it? They asked St. Augustine pretty much the same question. He said, love God and then do what you want. Because if you love God, anything you will do will bring you to sanctity. And if you look at the Fatima story, for example, as well, you'll see that it represented solutions outside of the political, economic, and social boxes. Our Lady did not bring a one-size-fits-all solutions to solve our problems. She gave a few fundamental principles of actions that included prayer and sacrifice, amendment of life, the first Saturday devotions, and she left it up to us how to do it. And so the second point is this. These natural solutions are the means by which we can answer the attacks in our culture. They are the brakes by which we can confront, slow down, or stop the cultural freight train that is leading us to disaster. They are the ways which we can say no more effectively. But even saying no effectively is not enough. And my third point is that in addition to saying no, you need to say yes. Many times we have very clear what we're fighting against. And we develop a passion for what we're fighting against. So many times we know what we don't want. We don't want socialism. We don't want abortion. We don't want same-sex marriage. And that fight absorbs us to the point that we really don't know what we do want. It's more or less like a doctor who only knows about diseases and has no idea of what a healthy body is. He will never be a good doctor because he does not have an idea of where he wants to go. And so we need to deepen an idea of where we want to go, what we want. And from the Fatima perspective, we want Christian civilization. We want the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. We want to return to order, and we want it soon. Once you figure out where you want to go, you can inflame yourself for a desire for it. You say yes. You say yes effectively. You say yes passionately. That's the best way to accomplish our goals. It helps us figure out the means to go where we want to go. Now, one of the best examples for this, I think, is on a more individual scale, is the case of conversions. I'm a cradle Catholic, and so I did not have a conversion story. I don't have a dramatic conversion story. But if you were a Catholic during the 60s, as I was, I think it's safe to assume that many of us here did go through some kind of reconversion experience. The pressure of the culture since then and since then is such that everyone comes out scarred. I know I went through a kind of that reconversion experience in college, when I suddenly perceived the truth and beauty of the faith and sensed a great desire to practice that faith seriously. And there was no system or manual in place to get me there. I simply knew what I wanted and I needed to do, and then found the organic means to get there. And so I changed my reading habits, the music I listened to, the clothes I wore, got rid of the television, started praying the Rosary. It's funny, nobody told me to do those things, but I knew I had to do them. It was something I knew I had to do. My reconversion experience filled me with an enthusiasm of the goal in which I was seeking and enabled me to overcome obstacles that I would have deemed impossible before. Later, you have to go through a more methodical and ordered way of learning about the faith and developing habits to practice virtue stably. But it's that burning vision of the faith that set me on fire and for which I am very grateful to Our Lady. How do you reconvert? Someone might ask. I desired it, and it called forth the solutions along the way. No two conversions or reversions are the same. And I'm sure many of you here can identify with such conversions because we have all felt that passion yourself. Most people's lives include several conversion stories that take us ever deeper into the faith. Another example of how to be ardent desire for something can lead you to overcome obstacles and be consumed by great passion are those who are consumed by great causes. And again, I think the pro-life movement has something of this. With little money and resources, they have accomplished great things against a liberal establishment of seemingly unlimited means at their disposal. I was at a pro-life event in Las Vegas speaking about return to order, and I was struck by how true this was. A speaker from 40 Days for Life got up and he said, you could tell he was just consumed with his mission. He knew exactly where he needed to go. And he told the audience that they had closed this clinic and another clinic and another clinic in Las Vegas. And he said they had their eyes on one big one that was right downtown. And then the speaker said, I have good news. The clinic has just put up a huge fence around the facility. I must admit, I thought it was rather strange. That didn't sound like it was good news. It seemed like a setback and not a victory. But he explained, he said that the minute, at least in Las Vegas, an abortion clinic puts up a fence, it's a sign they feel threatened. And they've seen it so many times. He says, it's a sure sign they will be closing. He said with great certainty, it's only a matter of time. And at the same time, he announced that he'd been talking with several others and ended up by saying, I'm still not sure how we're going to do this, but we're not only going to close this clinic, we're going to buy it and use it as a center to save innocent lives. That is to say, an ardent yes with very clear established goals can overcome obstacles that are beyond all expectations with the least of means at your disposal. Again, we see this in the homeschoolers who are consumed with the best interests of their children and assume the responsibility to educate them. Homeschooling is not for everybody, but they have achieved amazing things against the education establishment. And mothers consumed with the love of their children have successfully protested and defeated Common Core and critical race theory. There are those, for example, who are consumed by an ardent love of God, which overcome the obstacle that have arranged for adoration chapels all over the country. We have over 1,000 permanent adoration chapels in America. No other country in the world has anything like that. In these cases, there's no single rule book or manual to guide us. It's just that guiding vision of what you want and the ardent desire to achieve it. And so it must be with us. To the degree that we ardently desire the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary promised at Fatima, to the degree that we desire a return of America to order, and desire the destruction of this revolution, we will be on our way towards reaching our goal. So if we are firm in our resolution, we can, like the Fatima children, who again had nothing, like the pro-lifers, like the homeschoolers, overcome obstacles that would have been deemed impossible before. And so my third point is this. We need to say yes with a passion, ardent passion for what we desire. This will help us overcome the obstacles that stand in our way and call forth the means to do what we must and with the least means at our disposal. But even an ardent yes, it's not enough. And my final point addresses how to maintain our fervor and perseverance. When you have enthusiasm for something, things work, but it's easy to go ahead. But what about times when everything seems against you, everything's falling apart around you? What do we do then? And I will not be so foolish as to say that pure willpower and passion and enthusiasm is enough to win the battle we have before us. Anyone who says we can win by the power of our own strength is a liar. The fourth thing we can do is to admit our weakness and then confide in God's grace. Say yes to the grace. The grace of God is essential because it is the powerhouse of a return to order. We by ourselves can do nothing. This point is the real game changer. It's the real equalizer, or well, shall we say the unequalizer in this battle. It works together with the other 3 points I've just mentioned. It makes the battle unfair in our favor. Now, what do I mean by saying confiding in God's grace? For that matter, what do I mean by grace? It's something that's not too often talked about in the catechism class in a very specific way. Grace is characterized as a feel-good, amazing thing that fills a person with emotions and impressions and feelings. And grace is exactly the opposite of this. Grace, by definition, is the created participation in the uncreated life of God. But what happens when you receive graces from God is a strengthening of the person so that he becomes capable of things beyond his normal capacities. Professor Plinio, in his book, The Revolution, Counter-Revolution, he talks about this, and I will quote what he says because it's what our sacred tradition does teach us. He says, the vigor of soul needed cannot be explained unless supernatural life is taken into account. What grace does. The role of grace consists of enlightening the intellect, strengthening the will, tempering the sensibilities, so that we can be turned toward good. Hence, a soul gains immeasurably from supernatural life, he says, which elevates above the miseries of our fallen nature and, indeed, above the level of human nature itself. In the strength of the Christian soul lies, in this strength of the Christian soul lies the dynamism of a counter-revolution. It is an action where we feel the work of God in our souls to such an extent that we can say with St. Paul, I can do all things in he who strengthens me. And so when you sense the grace is working in those things that you are doing, keep doing what you're doing. Follow the grace where it leads, because the grace leads to extraordinary solutions. Now, someone might object to say, well, it's hard to find grace in these horrific times we're in. And the answer is it's precisely in horrific times when God sends graces. For as St. Paul says, where sin abounds, grace abounds much more. We can be assured that God will send much more abounding graces to help us in our efforts, supplying new ideas, strengths for the needs of the day, something for the day. Because nothing was more improbable than the rise of the church from the ruins of the Roman Empire. The history of the church is one of improbable saints, impossible situations, all aided by the grace of God. And so I would say I'll just give you a final consideration about how to answer the attacks upon our culture is to be sensitive to the graces that Our Lady sends your way. Be sensitive in two ways. First, be sensitive to the graces she sends to you. That is to say, when Our Lady knocks at your door with requests and graces, be sensitive to those graces. Say yes to those graces. When God gives us inspirations to do something to advance His cause, be sensitive to those graces and do it. When we feel strengthened in our will and our desires for Catholic goals, see that this is a grace by which we should say yes. I remember once doing a protest in Oklahoma City against a black mass held by the Satanists. And the problem is we didn't have a lot of people to send there. Everybody was very busy. It was in the middle of summer. It was just a mess. And so we sent word far and wide to people that we need people to fill our ranks and see what people in God's grace would do. And Our Lady went knocking on doors all over the place. And many said yes to the grace. And it was an amazing event because people came from all over. A van from Oklahoma, from Arkansas. Some people came down from Kansas, Louisiana, and Texas. All sorts of people showed up. And after the protest, everyone was very joyful. They all sensed the great joy of defending Our Lady's cause. They thanked us effusively for putting them to all that trouble to go to this protest. But this was a sure sign of grace. Grace always brings joy. And so when you hear the voice of grace inside your soul, be sensitive to it. Say, yes, I'll do it. I'll go to the protest or the Rosary rally, even if I don't really feel like it. I will reach out to others when an opportunity arises. If Our Lady wants it, I want it. Grace is calling me. And Our Lady will give us the courage and strength to do what we need to do, even beyond the strength of our human nature. Of course, just as a side note, be careful, since not every voice you imagine you hear, will be grace. Where there is confusion, agitation, division, and excessive emotion, it's a sure sign the devil is suggesting deviations from grace. But when you're sure it is the calm voice of grace, be sensitive and respond. Now, there's a second way to be sensitive to the grace, and that is to be sensitive to the movement of grace in others. A return to order is especially aided now by the fact a lot of people are looking for things. They're searching for something beyond the present system. And now more than Our Lady prepares the ground for her triumph with graces, and we should do everything possible to help her prepare that ground. I mean, there are a lot of amazing convergence stories out there. They are very amazing. We met a 17-year-old Protestant young man who was inspired by our TFP student action videos. And he admired the student activism, but he thought we couldn't possibly be good because we are Catholics. So he started to look into the faith, and against the wishes of his fiercely Protestant parents, he became a Catholic. He later became a Rosary Rally cut. And then we see many, many others along this same line. There was a commentary in one of the videos that says, "I'm a Baptist and admire the church. Viva Cristo Rey." There are countless people out there from all over the world that are receiving graces, even Islamic people looking for the faith. I contend that the ground is being prepared by grace. The souls of many who express a desire, a yearning, and admiration for the faith. When you see the grace working in souls, when others follow the grace and facilitate that, help them out, encourage them to go ahead, give them reading material, pray for them. And so be attentive to the grace you and others are receiving. Anything you do, no matter how small, be sensitive to the grace and follow it to the end. It can give all sorts of surprises and will eventually lead to America's return to order and help us answer the attacks upon our culture. That's how we actually developed our Rosary Rally campaign, our Public Square Rosary Rally campaign. We said, let's start this campaign and see what happens, see where the grace goes. The first year we managed to put together 2,000 rallies. And we said, well, this is definitely the grace is there. Last year we had 18,000. And so to summarize what we see, what I've done is I sought to prove that a return to God is possible by outlining 4 things to remember when engaged in the fight and answering the attack on our culture and our faith. The first thing is to remember that the other side has not won because we can say no. We all have free will, and they cannot program or force us to go against it. As long as we say no, we're in the fight. Second thing is that we must say no effectively by seeking out those organic, natural solutions that God puts at our disposal. We need to find the brake that stops the freight train of evil. It involves guiding principles and letting people do it the way they want. The third thing is to say yes with a passion that for our cause, which we should work to know better and love. We overcome the overwhelming obstacles in our path by inflaming ourselves with a desire for that which we love. And the fourth thing we can do is to admit our weakness and say yes to God's graces. The grace of God is the powerhouse of any return to order. It's the game changer and the unequalizer. It recognizes that we can do nothing of our own. We are slaves of the grace, both in ourselves and in working with others. So, if you want a short version of this talk, it is say no to evil, say no effectively. Say yes to God, and say yes to His grace. If you want the really short version, 2 no's, 2 yeses. Very simple plan. Now, if Our Lady has put us here, we can be assured that she will supply the graces and sustain us and help us reach our goal. So with this, I will conclude by tying it all together in light of the Fatima message. Our Lady of Fatima foresaw the tragedy of our times. She invited us to confide in her, and so she has invited us to action. She wants us to amend ourselves so that our Lord will not be offended anymore. She promises special graces to those who follow her counsels. So someone might ask, and it's from this Fatima perspective we should see things. We need to make the resolution to put these 4 things into practice to make this future happen. Now someone might object and say, well, what if the 4 things you mentioned fail? Because there have been times in history where it has failed. What do we do then? And I would answer, if you say no, and you say no effectively, if you say yes to God and yes to His grace, and nothing happens, well, then I would suggest you do something much more powerful and effective than anything I've mentioned up to this point. It is go to Our Lady. She has never failed. There's a story of St. Maximilian Kolbe, who was just a powerhouse of just getting things done. And he at one point he needed to build a printing press or printing facility because he did all sorts of printing and things. And so, but his superior was not very favorable to him. It was always creating obstacles. And so he asked this Polish property owner, said, well, can you give me this property? I need this property. And the Polish owner said, yes, of course, you can have it. But you have to say masses for me and my progeny forever, for as long as, forever and ever. And he said, well, that's pretty reasonable. We will say masses for your family and do everything. So he says, okay, I'll take the land. And then he went to his superior and said, look, I got the property. It's wonderful. There's just this one condition. It's, we have to say masses for him and his ancestors, as long as we have the property. And the superior said, no, I can't accept that. I said, no, but we got the property. He said, no, I can't accept that. And just to sort of create obstacles. So he said, go back to the man and tell him that no conditions. We want the property without conditions. So he went back to the owner and says, look, can't do it. We can't say the masses. He said, okay, no masses, no property. And he said, well, but I would like to do one thing. If you can give me permission to build a shrine to Our Lady on your property. And he said, yes, okay, I'll allow you to do that. And so he said, okay, you sign here, I'll build a shrine. He said, okay, good. And he says, well, what's the invocation of the shrine? He says, it's to the invocation of Our Lady who failed. He said, well, no, because Our Lady doesn't fail, but she did. So we need to build a shrine to Our Lady who failed. And he said, well, in that case, you can have the property without the conditions. So Our Lady does not fail. Go to Our Lady. She will answer. I'm a firm believer in Our Lady's intercession. I'm a firm believer in divine intervention, contrary to the beliefs of the Enlightenment that severed the link between God and nature. The modern society allows you to believe in miracles as long as they're small and personal. Well, I believe God intervenes in history. I believe in miracles. It's part of our sacred tradition. You find it everywhere in our liturgy, in the supplicant prayers, in the shrines to the saints and to Our Lady. God does intervene directly and through secondary causes. And if our Blessed Mother sees that we are fighting for her, and we make an effort and fight valiantly for her cause, I have no doubt she will come to our aid in unimaginable ways, in direct ways. It's not our cause that we are fighting for. And we must confide in her and be convinced that our Blessed Mother desires success even more than we do. And to the degree that our human solutions appear less likely, the more we have the right to look to God and His Mother to provide miracles, as she did at Fatima. Our Lady at Fatima was very much against the Enlightenment that says the miracles are personal and subjective. Because as you know, she performed a very unsubjective miracle of the sun before 70,000 witnesses. The most witnessed miracle in modern history. During this miracle, the sun left its position and danced in the sky before the crowds. She wanted to show us that if she can make the sun and make it dance, she can do anything. So we know Our Lady can do the greatest possible miracles. It makes sense that she can do smaller miracles for us when we need them. In fact, and most of us know in our lives that little miracles of even greater extent have appeared. We need to keep believing in those miracles. And so our final resolution should be to believe in those miracles. Believe it can be done. Confide in Our Lady to make this return to order happen, and soon. If we do our part, we can be assured that Our Lady will provide us with graces and miracles to take us to a return to order that will exceed all expectations. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What an amazing talk. Maybe we'll take a couple of questions. Francesca, maybe you'll pass around the microphone. Questions? I'm sure Michelle has a question.
Just remember 4 things. That's all you have to remember.
There is a march on the 21st. The march on the 21st. Some people are hesitant to go.
Yes.
Because
COVID.
they believe the places are barricaded and what's the point?
Right.
There could be more attacks from the other side as it happened last time.
Mm-hmm.
So we do needed your talk tonight to encourage us.
Yeah, I think in that case, we should just go ahead and confide in Our Lady, because what we've seen at the March for Life is in itself a miracle. I've probably attended 40 out of 47. And I remember in the 70s, it was very, very small, very few people. There were probably 30,000 people. And most of them were not Catholics. And there was not a bishop in sight. Today, there are bishops all over the place. There are Catholics all over the place. I mean, it's an amazing thing. You have 200,000, 300,000 people there. I mean, that definitely shows a sign of the grace. Follow that grace. Work with that grace, because there something will happen. I mean, they're working despite all the obstacles they're putting away. I mean, it is an amazing thing that has been done, and we have the obligation to follow that.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes. Yes.
Hi.
Yes.
I'm reading Rod Dreher's new book, Live Not by Lies.
Yes.
I didn't know anything about his Benedict option, but that sounds wrong to me from what you described it. I haven't finished this book yet, but it seems like he's kind of going back on the Benedict option a little bit and talking a little bit more about resisting.
Yes.
Have you read it? Do you have any thoughts on his reversion? I don't know if he's Catholic either.
Yeah, I read the book, I reviewed the book, and Rod Dreher, he's a journalist. He was born in Louisiana. He was from a Protestant family. He became a Catholic. He became a traditional Catholic. He left a traditional Catholic. He became an Orthodox. I'm not exactly sure where he is now, but he is very much all over the place. And so he's a hard person to get to hold on to. When he introduced the Benedict option, I read the book. I made sure I didn't get it wrong, because everybody says, no, you got it wrong. I said, no, I read it. These are the images he used. He uses the ark. He uses the levies. And but one of the things you do have to deal with when you're dealing with Rod Dreher is he's all over the place. You know, he'll say, no, it's not really that way. Benedict option is anything you want it to mean. And I've heard him say things like that. So that, it's not. It's hard to debate with that, because you have no definitions. He still holds to the Benedict option. In this particular book, he talks about more of a catechumenal way to go about. Well, if we can't float away, at least we can go in the basements or in the catacombs and survive there. The best thing is to fight before we get to the catacombs, and that's my position. And I think he's not quite right there.
Okay, if we don't have any further questions, I would be amiss if I did not mention. Oh, here we are. Okay.
I must have some good questions. They're asking me to ask questions.
All right.
I see tradition property, faith. I always get them mixed up.
Tradition family property. Yeah.
Tradition family property, and I see them down at the March for Life. We try to get there every year, except it was canceled last year. And I'm sure they're a Catholic organization.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yes.
And I have a book here by on the 100 Years of Fatima.
Oh yes, about the Triumph of Immaculate Heart of Mary.
He's a member.
Yes.
And I guess I just want to take advantage because you're asking. I can ask questions. The word protest has become it's a kind of like a strange word to Catholics, because we don't want to be associated with protest as Protestants, and we don't even call the counter-Reformation counter-Protestantism.
Right.
So
right. It's a pseudo-Reformation. It's probably the better way of putting it.
What do you call it?
Pseudo-Reformation.
Pseudo-Reformation. So when you say let's go to protest this or protest that, many Catholics I think will be like thinking maybe we shouldn't get involved. It's not that kind of a thing. I don't know.
Well,
there might be a better word for it.
Yeah, I think there is a better word for it. I would use the word resistance.
Okay, resistance.
Resistance is a word. It's biblical. It's St. Paul saying that when there are problems, we have the right and the duty sometimes to resist authority when it's respectfully and always firmly. And I think that's a good point to mention. When you do protest or when you do resist, always peaceful, always legal, never get rabid, never get overblown. Be very dignified in what you're doing. Give very clear reasoning. Don't get emotional. Those are the kinds of things that are most effective, and they will get results. And I think protest gets a lot of bad press largely because they become very emotional and very irrational. everything should be rational and reasoned. You can be passionate about it, but you don't have to necessarily get, to get super emotional.
And if I can make some political, bring some political things to light, maybe with some questions involved. Two of our presidents, the only two Catholic presidents we have seem to be liberal Democrats.
Yes.
And maybe he's not, I don't know. There's so much fake news, I don't know, maybe he's not even Catholic, Biden. But that's a very strange thing, but I'm just saying, is there room for pro-life liberals and stuff like that, or does that make sense, that kind of a thing? I used to wonder when I was a kid, and then I found out it's not possible. You can't be a Catholic communist. You can't.
Right, because it is a contradiction in terms, and either one or the other takes over.
Yeah.
You will go toward the leftist cause and abandon your Catholic faith, or you will go toward the Catholic cause and abandon your liberal ideas. One or the other, because the Church is a cohesive block, and it's always been a cohesive block. And
why has it become such a dividing line between Democrat and Republican, where you can't find representations in the Democratic Party, which are more conservative or more moral,
right,
or more pro-life?
Yeah, because the dynamism of good and evil generally do tend toward a more, let's say, more consistent applications of those principles. So a pro-lifer will eventually, it's funny because in the early days, pro-life was very Protestant, and eventually so many of them just converted. And you'll find them at traditional masses. I mean, it's amazing because they see a consistent life ethic in the Catholic Church and teachings. And they'll naturally go that way if they're consistent in their beliefs. The problem is we have a crisis inside the Church, crisis in society. That's the tough subject of our thing. And this crisis muddles everything. It should be very clear-cut. It should be very easy to discern. But it's a crisis, internal crisis, which are the worst crises. Crises in families are the worst because you can't get it together. You can't come together and reach agreements that need to be reached.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. I was telling you before that my friend went to Florida and now her son attends your school.
Yes.
And she's very happy. How do parents in New York can begin homeschooling from your program?
Well, we don't have a program like, say, Seton or some of these other programs that are accredited and allow people to homeschool. In fact, what we do have is a small boarding school for boys that uses the Seton program, actually. And it is a program where we teach young men to behave like Catholic gentlemen, teach them a life of piety and purity and activism. So, we have camps in the summer called Call to Chivalry camps, where a lot young people from all over the world, all over the country, even from the world, we have some foreigners, that go to either Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Arkansas. We have different places where we hold them, where they become acquainted with these ideas. And so that would be one way to introduce a young person to those type of ideas. So, I mean, if you really are interested, you could go to the table and just say, I'm interested, here's the name. We will follow up on that if you like.
Yes, in this state, like many other states, we're going to be in trouble. As I told you this morning, I went to visit my friend today, and everybody from the diocese was mandated to be vaccinated, or else. Someone came to do work in the rectory, and the first question was, are you vaccinated in order to do plumbing work? Could you imagine?
Right. We are called to give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and God the things that are God. But in this case, many in the Church are more Caesar than Caesar.
Thank you very much for your talk. A two-part question. Where you're active, do you enjoy deliberate support from those bishops in those dioceses? Was there a percentage? can you give us an idea of who is in your corner, supporting your work, helping you work, is welcoming you in TFP's work? The second part of the question is your cooperation with other more traditional orders, for example, Institute of Christ the King, FSSP, even SSPX, right? I mean, because I think we're all trying to do this. They're all trying to do the same thing, similar. Right?
Well, we are a civil organization. We're not a religious group. We're not constituted under church canon law. So we are an organization like any other organization from the point of view of what we can say or when we can say it. We say what we think, but we're not intimately connected, so that we need to make those consultations. So when we do work in a diocese, many times the bishop will say, very good, that's very helpful. But we're not there to say, well, can we do this? Because we know we can do that. Anybody can do it. Any civil association, from the, I would say the Boy Scouts, but you can't say that anymore. But just an ordinary organization can give opinions, can defend. They can pray the Rosary in the public square. There's no real restrictions on what a Catholic can do in those cases. So many times that's the way we do it. And in this case, we also avoid the harassment of those who don't like what we do and are very liberal and say, no, you can't do it. And we say, well, we can, because we are Catholics, and there's nothing in church teaching or canon law that says we can't pray a rosary in the public square or protest.
Thank you.
Oh, the second part of the question, pretty much the same reason where we go to Mass. It's an individual decision. Usually it's where it's closer.
Thank you for your talk, Mr. Horvat.
Okay.
Thank you.